So who has tried restorative justice? Again, most societies, most cultures have had it at some point, and many still have it under the radar of state justice. But certain civilizations have been particularly good at it. And Confucianism has a very strong tradition of restorative justice. Now, Confucius means China. China today has a very strong punitive justice system. So it's not crime against God as in Islam, it's crime against the Communist Party and the state. And it's very brutal, lots of death penalty and hardly an appeal system and so on. But traditionally, China, to the extent that it was Confucian, which is not to full extent, has that tradition of restorative justice. I cannot go too much into it because it's not a course about that. Here you have specific quote that describes reasons why it's the case. In East Asia, including China, and Confucianism has influenced all of East Asia, including Korea, of course, but even Japan. In East Asia, the emphasis is on proper social relationships and their maintenance rather than any abstract concern for a general collective body. It is a collectivism only among those bound by social networks. So many times you hear, and we have heard that already, about human rights in the West and in the rest of the world, human rights as a Western perspective, wrongly quoted as universalism. Here it says, in Confucian society, there is a strong emphasis on society, on the human relationships. So that's why it's not just a question, he is guilty, out. We have to fix the social relationship. So that is very important. It brings us back to that, not just the human rights of one person, but the human rights of everybody. And the fact that everybody needs to be healed, and we are social people. We are community people. And that kind of society is usually called collectivism, Western individualism and East Asian collectivism. But collectivism is actually a bad word. It means everybody together and that's it. That would refer to what, the communist China has today, where human individuals have very little value and their rights are not very much considered, but neither does the environment consider them. It's overall, people are just numbers. And I'm not saying that China is entirely like that, but it's to a large extent the current regime. Here it says that this applies only if a collection of people who are bound by social networks, in other words, a community, not just collective, community. And because Confucianism has a strong emphasis, and they're not the only ones, Africa, Southern, many places, they have a strong interest in restorative justice. And here you have a fantastic quote by Confucius. When I first read the Analects, I was really startled to see how Confucius was a humane person. Primary quality in Confucianism is yen. That means compassion, not compassion, sorry, benevolence. It's usually translated as benevolence, while Buddhism's main virtue is called compassion. It's very similar, and Christianity has charity. It's very, very similar. So Confucianism, especially Neo-Confucianism, which influences social life, for instance, in Korea, today has become very stiff. The roles, above, below, father, son, it's very stiff, bound by duties, and there is no free, it's a system that has a pretty bad reputation, actually. But it's because it has fallen away, just like Christianity in the Middle Ages has fallen away from Jesus' teachings. In the same way, Neo-Confucianism in many ways has fallen away from the original teachings of Confucius. Confucius said, the master, that means him, to impose the death penalty without first attempting to reform is to be cruel. To expect results without first giving warning is to be tyrannical. Wow. So, in other words, when somebody commits a crime, even a crime that would deserve the death penalty, just saying, okay, head chopped off, that's cruel and it's tyrannical. So it shows that is not Confucius' perspective at all. And why must you use executions in your governing? If you yourself want goodness, then the people will be good naturally. Again, that may seem a little bit optimistic, but it's a good start. The virtue of the gentleman is like the wind. That of the people is like the grass. When the wind blows, that means the king is a good man, then the wind of his goodness will blow over the grass of the people, and the grass is sure to bend. In other words, the wind of goodness will make, coming from the king and the other leaders, will naturally guide the people into becoming good. So that's the starting point. Of course, sometimes some people may not be good anyway, and then you have to handle it. But that is the religious foundation of Confucianism. And many people who advocate um, restorative justice today go back to the Confucian roots of it as a foundation, a theoretical, if you will, foundation. I'll let you read that, it's secondary. Now, if you go to Buddhism, you will have actually something similar. It doesn't have nearly as much weight as in Confucianism, but it's still there. So to punish is to harm. Of course, if you slap somebody, if somebody does something wrong and he is beaten or jailed or so, it hurts him. Yeah. So he impose harm on a criminal because he has harmed somebody else. So how can you justify then imposing harm on the criminal? Well, the first one, the harm of punishment is outweighed by some greater good. It deters others. So you have to punish the criminals so nobody else commits crimes. But in reality, does that work? Not so much. Number two, punishment does not really harm offenders. Actually, it's good for them. Again, it may be good for them, but depending on how it's done, if you just put them in jail where they rot away with other criminals, when they come out, they are worse. And number three, harming offenders is good in itself because retribution annuls the crime, which means basically an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You know, somebody does something wrong, he has to pay. Now, even eye for an eye, you can say you do it to soften the heart of the victim. But on the state level, you just punish because that's how it is. You know, the person did something wrong, he has to suffer, and that's it. Uh, and of course, it's a very problematical way to look at things. Uh, how does it work in Buddhism when restorative justice is practiced? I read the red part. After the penalty, the probation, the period where the offender has to pay a certain price, whatever it is, he was received back in traditional Buddhist society and enjoyed the identical position that he had earlier without stigma or contempt. How wonderful. You commit a crime, you really repent, and you pay a price, you compensate. And if the crime is serious, it can take years or even decades. Decades. But once everything has been done, the victim is satisfied, the community is satisfied, everybody is fine, then he is welcomed back as if he had never done anything, not without the criminal record that will make it almost impossible to get a job, and the dirty looks of people who know that no, he is fixed. Just like in unificationism, we have the understanding that when human beings are restored to their original position, God will embrace them like he would have embraced them at the beginning, because otherwise it's miserable for everybody, including God. So here, society doesn't want to have somebody among them. Oh, okay, he paid his price, but he used to do this or that. So that sounds very idealistic, but that's definitely what the goal of any justice system should be. And that goal will allow peace to exist in that society. And then if you extend that to the way nations work with each other, it will work very well. Now, talking about the extension to nations, you have World War I, where Germany was defeated and treated like, well, you treat defeated people in general very badly by the victors. And Germany had to pay a lot of reparations and was put down and creating a lot of resentment. Within 20 years, Hitler was there, stronger than ever, than Germany was ever, full of resentment, and they invaded all of Europe. So that's typically the way you don't do it. That is also punitive justice. Germany attacked, they will be punished. After World War II, it's the exact opposite. Germany attacked, okay. The system that did that had to be abolished, and the main perpetrators were tried in a justice, in a court of law, Nuremberg and so on. And some of them, the worst ones, were indeed executed. But mostly everybody else was involved in an attempt to fix everything that was broken on all sides. And Germany very quickly became accepted as a normal country, just like in that Buddhist perspective. Germany today is not considered as, it's another one of the many countries in Europe, but that one, they had Hitler, they did horrible things. Nobody feels like that about Germans today. Maybe a few people, you can have personal resentment because your grandfather was killed in Auschwitz or something like that, and understandable. But generally, people made a separation. That was then under Hitler. They did terrible things. Today, Germany is a totally new country. The people have nothing to do with that. And it works. You have the European Union. Well, it doesn't work perfectly at all, but it works a lot better than after World War I. And here you have some cases that you may look at. Actually, I should put these, and I will make them available to you because you cannot click on the links in a video, obviously. But you see, basically, it can go both ways. So first, mother of 8-year-old girl who was murdered in 1988, probably it took decades for the judgments to be finalized. She wants to be the last face the accuser killer sees. So in other words, she wants the killer, the person who killed her daughter, to be executed, and she wants to be there in front of him to make him feel guilty. So you can ask, is that person going to have peace of mind or closure, as they always say, once the killer is executed? I strongly doubt it. I understand her. It's difficult to overcome these feelings, but she won't find peace. Then you have Texas executes convicted killer despite plea by victim's family. So the victim of the murder, I mean, the victim is dead, but the family of the victim said, please don't give him the death penalty. We forgive him. The state ignored that. So that's what I've said before. The punitive justice system can be very cold. Sometimes they listen, but many times it doesn't matter. He is guilty. He will be executed. another person every day of my life. I completely changed. It is, if I remember well, a man who attacked a Sikh community. It's a religion from northern India. And the community forgave him. So somehow he was involved in some form of restorative justice, and he said it completely changed. My life changed after I assaulted a Sikh man, and so on. So you can see it goes both ways, and usually the restorative way works better. Now, the case of Islam is very interesting. Um, First of all, and I have no time to explain, and I'm actually really no expert, but the system, the legal system, traditional, conservative uh, system of Islamic law as it is practiced in Iran still to a large extent, and in Saudi Arabia, and it's a Sunni versus Shiite, but anyway, very similar in many ways, and it's changing in Saudi Arabia, is based on crimes against God. There is no negotiation possible. That means if you're Muslim and you change to another religion, you're in deep trouble. You can lose your life. But any kind of a crime committed against a fellow human being is subjected to the form of law that's called qisas, which means largely based on the Old Testament law, an eye for an eye. So it sounds very brutal, you know. I you lose your eye because of me, and someone then I have to have my eye taken out. Believe it or not, in Iran, it's been happening. But it also involves the possibility for the victim to seek an arrangement. You pay me money, and especially when you're poor, it can make a big difference to compensate for the harm created by your crime, or you can forgive him, or usually a mixture of both. So you see, that system, in a way, can seem very horribly brutal and cruel, but at the same time, it opens a way for something that's much better and much more lenient and much, much more understanding, we would say artistic, than what we have in the Western system. So again, you have examples in Iran in particular of really horrible ways where somebody throws acid into the face of a woman who loses her eyesight. Then he has to have a surgeon remove his eyes, this kind of terrible thing. Now, it's also terrible to commit that crime. So I can imagine that some of you would probably think he deserves it. But anyway, but here you have a situation of a young man who was fighting with, that's the one who has the head covered and uh, is going to be hanged. He's a very young man. He was fighting with another young man with a knife. They both had a knife. They had a fight with a knife. And as can happen when you fight with a knife, one of the two was killed. Not necessarily even the worst one. Maybe it's the one who started the fight. Anyway, he was killed. And you kill somebody, take a life, you lose your life. So he was sentenced to death by hanging. And you can see hanging is not just you drop and you break your neck instantly, as we have it usually. No, you're on the chair, and the family of the victim kicks the chair, and then you dangle and you die slowly and painfully. So it looks very brutal. However, the family of the victim has the freedom to say, no, I don't want him to die, and to either forgive him or forgive him conditionally if he pays some amount of money. In that case, the two mothers, the mother of the killer and the mother of the victim, came together and they cried together. And this, you see this woman under the rope with covered in black. She just slaps so the guy goes here. I mean, the criminal, the murderer, stands there attached and his head covered, and he has the rope around his neck, fully expecting to be executed. But instead of kicking the chair, that woman slaps him to say, like, don't do it again. And then takes off his head cover and lets him out. So that you cannot do. In Texas, you cannot do that. You see, you don't, it's a good side of that form of justice, even in a country like Iran. And I have an Iranian student who confirmed to me that this indeed happens like that. So even in certain circumstances where the situation may seem particularly brutal, uh, it can actually suddenly turn out to be the exact opposite. Now, it also has its downsides. So I'm just trying to, I gave you the ideal, and then I'm trying to give you some practical situation in Pakistan where you have the same type of justice. And that type of justice says, if you kill my daughter, well, you will be sentenced to death because you took a life, you will lose your life. But I, as the father of my daughter, I can forgive you if I want. This is what in the example we've just seen. So when a young woman, and this is a case, May 27, 2014, a young woman, we'll see her in a moment, lived a life basically that the family considered to be a shame for the family. And you will see immediately why. So they considered, very conservative family, they said she should change, of course, first. And they tried everything, she wouldn't. So the father told the son to kill her. It's horrible, but if it's a shame for the family. So the father asked his son to kill the daughter, which he did. And then the son went to court for murder. But the father said, I forgive you for them killing my daughter. But his son, and he ordered him to do it. So that was a clear abuse of the system. And so in Pakistan, it was abolished. So yeah, that is the young girl. So she lived a life that whatever it is that the family didn't approve. Now, restorative justice in the West, because after all, the question is, can we bring that to the court rooms of most countries in the world? This is the first case that was a breakthrough in the West. And again, many people never heard of it, but because it's still a minority. But the first case that really made a splash in the restorative justice circles in the West, it was in Canada. This guy on his bike did acts of vandalism, and he destroyed property of 22 people of his town, a small, very small town. So people basically he knew because he was drunk. And then in court, I skipped the details, the judge allowed him to have, I think he got a suspended sentence instead of going to jail, but he had to make reparation. And so he had to go to ring 22 doorbells, I think together with somebody, and apologize to the people. And he says, to see the anger in their eyes and the disgust on their face, I felt very much ashamed. And then he became, of course, completely reformed, and he became apologist. I mean, he became an activist for restorative justice to try to extend it. And there's other cases of two people who commit a crime together. One was rich and from a rich family, the other one not. And the one from the poor family accepted to do certain things to restore restorative justice like this, which are quite humiliating for him. And he turned out very well afterwards. He got off, he did some time, but then he got off and he had a very good life. The rich family, no, we are never going to allow our son to be humiliated like that. And he was sentenced, and he ended very miserably. So, of course, that's just one case, but there are cases like that where you can see how things have a chance to work. Now, next is transitional justice. So that's an application of mostly restorative justice, but sometimes also punitive justice. Transitional justice refers to how societies respond to the legacies of massive and serious human rights violations. It asks some of the most difficult questions in law, politics, and the social sciences, and grapples with innumerable dilemmas. So, transitional justice, one key, most famous case is South Africa after the end of apartheid. And how do we deal with all the injustice that was done? And it's not just one person, it's the system. So they have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think that's the proper expression. Um, and it went a certain way, and it's considered to be a very like an example of how to deal with things, even though a very imperfect one, but nevertheless, that's one case. Then you have the Gacaca courts in Rwanda after the Rwanda massacres. And then also in Nepal, there has been some kind of a truth. I'm not sure what the name of that commission was exactly, but some reconciliation commission to deal with all the past. And they have worked to some extent, and we are going to look at them now. Of course, the other solution would be that anybody who was involved in any way with the previous system will be jailed or executed. So in South Africa, it would mean basically every white person should be expropriated, should be sent to jail, or it's not doable. And it's not the purpose. And fortunately, it was not the desire of the new majority. And in Rwanda, it would mean all the Hutus get executed, or all those who committed crimes. And again, it's too many. And then it will surely lead to some decades down the road, it will start again, and revenge and all that. So transitional justice are efforts to address a legacy of large-scale human rights abuses that cannot be fully addressed by existing judicial and non-judicial structures. As I said, it's just not possible. Government responses have included criminal prosecution, of course, in some cases you have to do that, truth commissions, what really happened, expose it, reparations, how do you fix it, gender justice, how women were treated and should be, security system reform, you have to, memorialization, and other efforts at reconciliation. So it's always, the goal is to create reconciliation, which is peace. So get over the illusion that by just eliminating the criminals, you will have peace, but everything is aimed at creating a situation where peace will prevail because the hearts of people will be at peace. They are reconciled. Now, again, that's the goal. That's the idea. I'm not saying some of you may, have lived through some of these and you know how much they are anything but perfect, but that's the idea. So there are lots of, as indicated here, dilemmas. Dilemmas, that means it's nice as a goal, And eventually we have to get there. You know, we all know that eventually the world has to reconcile with itself and Guk. But how to handle it, you have many, many situations where it's almost impossible to do good. I mean, whichever way you go, you feel that it's not fair. So you have the situation, you know, on the world level. Now we have Vladimir Putin, but also Netanyahu. They are both wanted for war crimes. How do you deal with that? Uh, is there a better way than whatever you do? And then reparations, how far? Uh, the Romans controlled most of the Mediterranean. I mean, all the lands around it. And they committed lots of, I mean, it's just an oppressive system. But are you going to ask the Italians today, 2000 years after it, to repair all the injustices perpetrated by the Roman Empire, emperors 2000 years ago? Nobody, it's laughable, right? So at some point it stops, but where? When? And today we have, or we've had a few years ago, it was very strong, the cancel culture in the United States. Cancel culture means everybody who was recognized as having been a great man or woman is looked at more carefully. And when you find something that he did wrong, then you take him down. You know, Christopher Columbus had his statue because, after all, he discovered America. But then, oh yeah, but he was a racist, he had slaves, and so then out. Which, okay, if you want. But then everybody, you start looking at everybody, and even people like Lincoln, who liberated slaves in America, has been attacked by some people. He should also be down. So finally, it's like the French Revolution. Everybody, you kill all the people who are obviously guilty, and then you start killing each other because you find fault with everybody. And so that cancel culture is not very popular these days in the government because I don't need to explain. But it has been indeed problematic. Now, the most well-known system of restorative justice, besides maybe South Africa, Truth and Reconciliation, is what happened in Rwanda after the genocide. Now, Gacaca, courts, that court system is a traditional system. It means on the grass, you know, the soft grass that welcomes you to sit down, something like that. That has been the traditional restorative justice system of the tribes in Rwanda probably for ages. But it was brought back after the Rwanda massacre because the massacres were so massive, and I guess you all know that, that the regular justice system could not handle it. Again, you would have had to kill countless people or put to jail people that you would have to build jails for years to have enough space. It was just not possible. So there was a justice system established, a three-tier justice system for the most horrible crimes, international tribunals. You know, after the United Nations and the Western powers let that massacre happen, which they shouldn't have probably. I mean, not probably, but they did. They let it happen. But then they came in. And for the worst crimes, those who systematically committed crimes, they were judged by an international tribunal. And I think there was the death penalty for the worst crimes. I don't know exactly. Then for the second worst people, those who committed murder, but they didn't do it systematically, they were not the leaders, basically. They were judged by regular courts like we have them in most countries, but Rwandan courts, not international tribunals. And then the third level were Wachacha courts that were local or regional, you know, either on the community level or on the district level. And they had certain guidelines and so on. But essentially, it meant that those who committed crimes against others were um, asked to come in front of the community court, circle centering on the elders, who asked them to confess their crimes. And if they were willing, usually these people, since it was a small community in the jungle, they were kicked out after committing their crimes and after order was reestablished. So they lived somewhere in the neighborhood in the jungle trying to survive somehow. They were welcomed back. If you come and you confess to your crime, we will reintegrate you. And so some of them just didn't want to, but those who did, and those they stayed forever in the jungle, probably died at some point, killed by wild animals or whatever. But those who wanted to be reintegrated, they had to come and confess to their crimes clearly. And everybody knew what they did. So confess, they could not lie. So they confessed to their crime, admitted guilt, and the willingness to compensate. I was not there, so I cannot give you more details. That's the idea. And then they were reintegrated, which is much better for everybody, of course, because the understanding was they committed these crimes when everybody else did it. They were like drunk by this massive wave of, kill all the Tutsis. So even people who were good friends or good neighbors before suddenly behaved like that, and then they wake up and what did I do? So the idea was forgive, love, unite, so to speak. And there is quite a bit of literature and also videos that you can find online about that. Now, the question, this is a video that you will have access to. The question is, how does it work? And that is something where I would really like to know, because I've heard both sides, in extreme ways. First, I saw years ago a documentary, 1 hour documentary on the Guachacha courts. And it showed people in detail, what they did and what happened and who the victim is. And I remember in particular, one man had chopped off the hand of another man. So he didn't kill him, but still, amputated his hand with a machete. So that's a serious crime. But somehow he confessed, asked for forgiveness. Anyway, the two became closest friends. And for the rest of his life, or at least so far, the one who had cut off the other person's hand went with him wherever he went. Basically, he became his hand, because without a hand, with only one hand, you're handicapped. So they became close friends and they would stick together wherever they went. And the one who had cut off the hand served as an extra hand to the victim. So how beautiful, right? And things like that. And it sounded like everybody who is willing to come and to confess and to do what has to be done was welcome, reintegrated completely as a normal member of that community. But elsewhere, you see that much of the time these things were imposed. So then it becomes like under Mao Zedong in China, the people are dragged to a people's court and forced to confess crimes that they didn't really commit and don't believe they committed. They just say what they're asked to say. There's no transformation inside whatsoever. And then they're sent to a concentration camp instead of being killed. Some of it apparently was more like that. And if if you were close to whoever the leader was, you got off easy. And if you are not, you got off not easily. you, you, you got a brutal punishment. So I've heard that ideal vision, I've seen that ideal vision presented and by professionals. So it was not just somebody who posted it on the web. It was a well-done documentary, but presenting an ideal vision. And I've seen uh, descriptions that show it as a very ultimately unfair system, where also the new president of the country, didn't practice it in a fair way. And so basically it looks good, but it's bad. So that shows just that everything can be used and abused, done well and not well, and that expecting things to be done perfectly well everywhere is naive. However, what's really important for this course in general for peace studies is that the consideration for everybody and everybody's interest on the deep human level, as well as on the practical level, is a very good thing. And working towards reconciling all the parties on the large level in transitional justice, transition from one state to another, or on the personal or family or local level in restorative justice is a good idea, I believe. And it is emphasized in peace studies that we should try to fix things and not just to eliminate the person who did something wrong and lets the wounds unhealed. So I think that was a necessary element of this course and something that some of you maybe will experience in your countries and that I would hope to experience in my country, even though it's not part of it at this time. And I will conclude with this. Thank you.